heavens declare the glory of God.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you can start if you'd like to. So,
Okay. Um, so I don't know if I ever told you about it. I had a pretty strong born again experience back in 2016. And after being a Christian my whole life, or pretending to be a Christian, and I believe that in 2016 I had like fully gotten there, and like I went through the salvation process again, and I felt that it had like very suddenly changed my life in a dramatic way. Like I stopped doing a bunch of things that I had been doing. I started to live on faith um, completely,
mm,
and I moved to a new city pretty blindly, thinking God was leading me there. I changed jobs. I changed everything, um, and I right away became a member of a church, a Garb church. If you're familiar with Garb,
mm,
maybe you're affiliated with it. I don't know.
no, I don't know.
Okay, General Association of Regular Baptist Churches.
Yeah, I've never heard of that.
Yeah,
Sorry.
maybe it's an old thing. I don't know, but
Maybe
there's a
it's
few of them
just in
around.
your area.
Um, I think it was nationwide because my family was a member of one all the way out in California back in the
Oh,
'90s. So anyway, I joined one there in that city, and I right away started a relationship with the pastor, and he started counseling me 2 hours a week,
okay.
helping me grow as a Christian and like start a new life as a new man. And I got baptized for the first time within about a month. And for me, that was a really big deal because I had never done it before as you know, at any time in my life.
Oh,
And I got up in front of the church and I gave a public profession of faith and a little bit of my testimony, and then got baptized. And for about a year, I maintained that course, living on faith, um, always searching for why God had me there, thinking that I was on some kind of a mission from God. Like I'm searching for God's will. Like
mhm,
why did he save me and change my life and move me here? I must be for a very specific purpose. And so I did a
right.
lot of things during that year, was searching for God's will. Um I gave away at the end of the year about half of my net worth to a guy in need just so that I could witness to him.
Really?
Um I had several relationships with other Christians that I thought, okay, this guy's hurting really bad. He's dealing with like suicidal thoughts. Maybe I'm just here to be a good witness for him, or be a good brother in Christ to try to lift him up, or help him with his problem. Like I went through a whole series of these things, thinking each one was okay. That maybe this is why I'm here. Maybe this, and every one of them I watched fail, just completely fall apart in front of me, um, and in such a way that it was that clearly was that was not my purpose. And one of my very first doubts is when I started at that church as a new member. I was like super on fire for Jesus. I mean, that was the only thing I was living for. And I would look around the church and I would see these other church members with these frozen smiles on their faces, going through the motions.
Yeah.
They didn't seem genuine to me, even though they claimed they were. I mean, they said what they were supposed to say and did what they were supposed to do.
Yeah.
And then, like on Wednesday nights, I would come to prayer meeting, and what really bothered me was we were essentially in our small groups going down a list of demands that we wanted God to meet, and it seemed to me that nobody really cared about like what their purpose was or how they were there to serve God. It was, oh, I'm having trouble with this or trouble with that, or financial issues, or I have back pain,
Yeah.
or somebody has cancer, or we need to pray for these people or that. It was like these demands of God, and I'm like, this is not why we're here. And there was a big emphasis on getting to heaven, and I see that with a lot of other believers. Like it's all about getting to heaven.
Yep. Yep.
I'm like, is it about getting to heaven, or is it about serving God, or witnessing, or all of these things we're instructed to do in scripture? Like why are you just so obsessed with getting to heaven? It's like you you're just trying to get this big prize in the end, and it really irritated me. And I sat down with my pastor, and I even asked him one day. I said, "Is it possible to have a false belief in the truth? Like, what's wrong with these people? Like, they have the truth, they profess the truth, but it's as if they don't have a real belief, like it's a false belief."
Right.
And really respected him on a lot of levels during that time because he was helping me a lot. But I even saw some of this in him. He was being very political in how he treated subjects like that because he wanted to say yes, but he didn't want to offend anyone. And that bothered me that he couldn't speak the truth because he was held hostage by his paycheck, even as a pastor, somebody who was alleging to live just for God. So that was my first doubt, was seeing other Christians that were just not real, or that weren't living their faith.
Right.
And as a whole, if you set Christians aside as a separate group from the world, you should be able to see a difference as a whole.
Right.
Of course, there are people that you can point to, say, well, these people are different. They are definitely, you know, living their faith. You can look to them as an example, but it shouldn't be individuals and it shouldn't be small groups. It should be, this group is different, the majority of them, because I can do the same with any other group. I could find Muslims that are like genuine people, really living their faith, doing
Right.
the right thing, doing what they think is the right thing, being good testimonies. Um, but I mean, you clearly don't think they have the truth, or the Buddhists have the truth. So when you put them up against each other, it shouldn't be a, well, Christians are no different than anybody else. It should be, no, these people definitely are special. There's something about them as a majority, and I didn't see that. I just couldn't find that.
Mm.
And I had some other doubts. I went online to try to find like more people I could interact with, more Christians that could like help me with my struggles. And instead, I found, um, just by accident, found people debating things online like the historicity of the Gospels or the dating of the book of John, and it was stuff I'd never seen before, never encountered any of that stuff because I had gone to Bible college and I had taken courses in apologetics, and
Yeah.
absolutely none of that stuff was covered at all. It was as if this was
Really?
some kind of big secret that had been kept. The real questions, the real issues, and it scared me at first a lot because I'm like, why haven't I ever encountered this before? Nobody talks about this.
Yeah.
So I took those questions to my pastor, looking for some kind of reassurance, and the only thing he could do for me was um, just give me more scripture. And when I pushed him further, he took off his bookshelf Josh McDowell's Evidence That Demands a Verdict. He's like, well, this probably has the answers to your questions. I'm like, I read that years ago, and the stuff I'm hearing ain't in that. So that's not going to help either. But I put it aside because I had strong enough faith that I was not going to let that stuff sidetrack me. I wrote it off to like, well, it's satanic deception, whatever. We'll just put it aside and won't worry about it. God knows. At the end of the year, um, after going through this year of living on faith, like towards the end of the year, I was just desperate for anything. Um, I was on my knees like sometimes 4 hours a day, just begging God for an answer. And what I wanted wasn't just, I mean, I wasn't looking for a solution. I was just looking for anything, just some kind of sign, the smallest thing ever, just a whisper in my ear, some kind of reassurance from God to just let me know that He was still there and that He
Mm.
still cared and that I still had some kind of purpose. I just a reason to keep going forward. And I got nothing back at all, no matter how long I waited, no matter how hard I prayed. The answers to prayer that I had seen in the beginning just sort of faded away and ended. And I gave up and I went back home. I moved back to where I'd started, and I like completed my little, I don't know what you call it, mission or whatever. And I thought to myself, I'm just gonna wait on God. I'm gonna stop praying. I'm gonna stop asking for an answer. I'm just gonna wait. It's time for me to just for God to show me what He wants from me. And nothing ever happened at all. Nothing. I mean, a stranger didn't call me on the phone from deep in my past and say, "Hey, how are you doing?" And or like, "Hey, I became a Christian. I wanted to reconnect with you," or like, "I heard something about you," I mean, I didn't meet somebody randomly in the grocery store. Like, I mean, God sent nobody to encourage me. He's like nothing happened at all. Like I got nothing except questions. And over eventually, I moved to Kansas and got married, and that's where I'm at now. And um, I started to think about this experience a lot deeper on a more like existential level. Like um, the the problems of Christianity started to bubble to the surface over time, and probably the biggest doubt that I had that started off my journey towards atheism was the problem of hell. And I thought to myself one night, my wife is like the sweetest, kindest person I've ever met, and she claims to be a Christian.
Oh, really?
But if what's that?
I didn't know that about your wife.
Okay. Well, at the time, like,
Oh,
I thought to myself, if this person who has no guile or hatred towards any living creature happened to be born
I'm
into
so
the
sorry.
wrong, it's okay.
Uh, oh, hi. He just stuck a dog in my room.
Okay.
So dramatic. Sorry, you keep going.
Yeah, sorry. So the thought occurred to me that if she had been born into the wrong culture or the wrong family or the wrong part of the world, just in the wrong situation somehow, and she had missed the message, the correct message, um, this God would have burned her in the lake of fire anyway. It wouldn't have mattered how nice she was, wouldn't have mattered, anything about her personally. Just the fact that she had missed the message would result in this eternal torture. And I thought about that for days. I'm like, there's something wrong here, man. This just doesn't add up. Like, there's got to be more to if I am going to think this, if I am going to accept this story, I have to be 100% sure that it is correct because it is such an extreme thing. And the other doubt that I had, so okay, so my first doubt was the Christians weren't genuine,
Right.
and the second doubt was I got nothing back from God at all, and the third doubt was hell is such a terrible thing that it just something's. And the last doubt was the disproportionate distribution of salvation throughout the world. The message doesn't seem to be getting through in a way that everyone either has a fair chance to hear it and accept it and then rejects it regardless, or if the flip side, because I mean we have free will and we have election, or seem to be the competing Christian doctrines. Either you choose God or God chooses you. But either one of those models, if I apply them to the world and I look out on the world and think, okay, I should see one of those two manifest some way in the real world. I don't see either one. Either God is choosing nations and family trees and regions and like very specifically in a way that doesn't make sense, because why would God choose a family tree? Why would God abandon like the entire subcontinent of India? It doesn't make
Mhm.
sense. It's almost like he'd given them up under election. He's given them up to the devil. That didn't seem fair or logical. And if God had given them a fair chance, then we would see a better distribution of believers. And let's just sticking with India, only 2% of the population of 1 billion Indians are professing Christians. Now, that could be greater or it could be
Mhm.
lower, but it they're not getting the message for whatever reason. And so when you see it not working in the real world, it's an indicator that something's wrong. And so that started me on like a full-time, like 8-hour a day search to figure this out. Like I have to either verify this is true
Mhm.
or I have to falsify it. And it only took me about a month because I it was as soon as I was like presented in earnest with the evidence from the other side, there was no way that I could fix it using apologetics or using the Bible. It just didn't add up. And eventually I had to allow myself the possibility that that I could be wrong. Probably the biggest hurdle was just allowing for the chance that you're wrong. Like that's so hard to do because as a Christian, you cannot allow for that. It's like I if I as soon as I admit that I could be wrong, it's like now I'm sinning, now the doubt creeps in, now God's gonna judge me for this. So just to get over that one little hurdle, like I could be wrong. Like I could
Mm.
actually be wrong. And then eventually um I had to admit that I was wrong. It was the what my final doubt was the gospels, the reliability of the gospels.
Mm.
Um, I listened to some Bart Ehrman lectures that I'd never seen before, and by the time he was done talking, I just sat there at my computer and I was like, I now can't say that I still believe this. Like, there's enough reasonable doubt that I've turned a corner here, and I was extremely depressed. This isn't something that we have this stereotype of atheists or ex-Christians, and it's not really stereotypes really don't hold up because I didn't want to stop believing it.
Right.
I mean, it scared the crap out of me. I was
Yeah.
depressed and terrified at the same time for weeks because now I have to accept this idea that like literally nothing's in control and literally anything can happen, and that is a terrifying thing to think that some all powerful being is not actually controlling it. Um, Anything could happen, and
Mm.
man, it took me a long time to claw my way back to a point where I could deal with this. Um, had to accept some really dark truths, and it's not. I don't think it's something that most people can do. I'm not saying that like in an arrogant way,
Right.
where I'm like, "Well, I'm special." Um, I'm not special. I just admitted it, and uh, maybe it takes a certain kind of brain to like accept that. I don't know because that's definitely not what 99% of the population does. They just no matter what, they can't get there. It's just too dark. Um, but pushing past that, it's like dark truths make you invincible in a way. It's like nothing can really hurt you in the same way it could before if you just internalize it. But it's hard. It's really hard work. Um, I mean, I would say I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but I guess it's not true because I want people to be consistent with reality. I think if we push far enough into the future, we can get past this no man's land of no faith. And I admit there's problems with. I mean, there are casualties in this process. I mean, there's the suicide rates have increased, drug
Mhm.
use has increased. Like it's difficult, really hard, but the only way forward is through. Because if my opinion is if we drag along the myths with us, they're going to hold us back. And we've got to defeat the fear and the despair so that we can find a better future
Mm.
eventually. I don't honestly don't think that's going to happen. I don't think we will get to the next level. I think this is going to be a fight forever
Mm.
between I mean, I think we're between the myth, the fantasy fiction of our past and the science fiction of our future, and the middle there is a time of despair, depression, and a no man's land that we have to get through. And I don't think that as a human species we're going to get through it. I think we're always going to be dragging these myths with us in some way, and I that's it's depressing, but that's where I'm at. So I how did I deal with my doubts? Well, I failed ultimately dealing with my doubts from the Christian perspective. I think the only way to prevail against doubts is to give into them because they're doubts for a reason. Um, so I was not able to reconcile my doubts eventually. So
Hmm.
I guess I'd like to hear what your doubts have been as a Christian. I mean, I'm sure you've struggled with doubts like all Christians do at some point or another, but like I want to hear what they are, and then I want to see how you've solved them, like how you've fixed them,
Hmm.
reconciled them.
Yeah, well, and I definitely want to thank you for sharing all that. I know that a lot of that is very personal. Um, and I mean, it just means a lot. I get to have this on my channel. You will let me have this on my channel, right?
Sure, yeah, and I got no problem with that. Yeah.
But yeah, it does really mean a lot. Um, so I'm guessing though that your wife isn't a Christian now, though.
My wife has struggled with the same things that I have with God not answering her prayers or not showing Himself to her. Like she spent a lot of time on her knees as well, asking for answers, and she never got them.
Mm,
So right now, I think she's sort of in limbo. She just doesn't know what's true. Um,
mm,
we stopped going to church not because like I didn't want to go to church anymore because I told her like I'm totally fine. I'll go to any church you want, anytime. And I think we eventually stopped going because she didn't want to go anymore.
mm,
Not because of her doubts necessarily, but um, because she didn't really feel welcome or included in the church that she'd grown up in, and we didn't really find a new one, so we just sort of stopped.
yeah.
But I don't know. I really don't know if she would call herself a Christian right now or not. She would like to believe there's God. So I kind of, for the most part, I try to leave that alone.
Mm, I see.
Not trying to convince her either way.
Yeah. Well, and that's certainly very nice of you. I know a lot of atheists would just go straight for like, you know, like certain Christians like going ham on it and like, you better believe this or it will be the end of our marriage. Or not believe this in an atheist case.
I'll fight with Christians and I'll fight with my family because I think I especially with my family I think I have a right to because of the baggage. And I'll argue with strangers if only if they bring it up. Only I will never bring up the topic of religion. But
I think.
I like well, right. But I would like to just not I like leave my wife alone.
Mm,
That's how I approach that.
yeah. No, and I understand, even just you talking about the depression just from a psychological standpoint, bringing it back up isn't the most pleasantful feeling. And it's really still hard. You probably still have depression, I'm guessing.
So I tried a lot of things to beat the depression. Um, oh, actually, when I was living in the city, having my my year of faith, I thought one of the things that God had provided me for a solution was to take an antidepressant.
Oh,
I prayed about it for a long time, and I finally went ahead with it, and
mm.
it did nothing for me.
Those
It
usually can make it
actually
worse, right?
it can. For me, it took away my emotions, and it
Oh,
made me feel like less connected to God, and so I stopped taking it for that reason. I counted it as another failure that I thought was God's will that wasn't. Later on, um, after leaving Christianity, I tried again, and it didn't work again. I tried a lot of things, and the only thing that finally worked was hard exercise.
like
Um,
working out?
about 2 years ago, I
Oh,
just decided like I'm gonna start hitting the gym really hard,
oh,
and that's the only thing that cured it.
yeah.
But I don't, yeah, I don't really struggle with it anymore.
Oh, it's so funny you mentioned that because my little brother he's a bodybuilder, and like it's kind of a joke in the bodybuilding space is that if you want to fight depression, go to the gym, hit some weights. Um, so in my case, I don't know, depression has been something I've battled for a really long time, and I've just learned to conquer it in a sense. But I appreciate you telling me that. um, yeah, I guess in terms of my story, because I guess we could go for hours, like me just asking you questions, but I
Yeah.
know you want to know. It really goes back to when I was young, and I know you're aware of this. Not every church is perfect. Okay, it's a bunch of imperfect people trying to praise a perfect being, right? It's just there's
Hmm.
so many problems. I could go on for hours naming all the issues just even in my own church and the issues we've had over years. But mainly, I grew up in a solid Bible believing, I guess you could say Baptist home. My dad didn't come from a Christian family, and his story is actually really cool. Sad, because his mom leaving him was what ultimately led him to call out to God and become a Christian. And so then he ended up going to a Bible college and meeting my mom there. And they both grew up in divorced homes. My mom grew up in a Christian home, but not a great Christian home. Like, yeah, that's all I can say. But so they both had these issues in their lives, but I think, and I'm the only reason I'm going over this is because this is just to help you understand where I come in. Is that my mom came from a pastor's family, and my dad comes from a family where God is like something that is more cultural. But his grandfather was a Christian and brought him to church, and even his father. And so that was when, after his mom had left, he kind of just eventually gave his life to God in ultimately seeking him for help. So he didn't necessarily go to a Baptist university or a Baptist institution. He went to Maranatha. I don't know if you know what. You probably have no idea what
I
Maranatha
do.
is.
I do.
Oh,
Yeah.
Maranatha University.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay. Well,
Well,
uh,
we're kind of part of the same culture as
okay.
for backgrounds. Like we probably would have shared a lot of theology, a lot of views, and a lot of common terms. I'm sure. So I know all about Maranatha. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, he went there after he went to, I think it was like Word of Faith. It was another institute, but he went to Maranatha. I believe he went there just for like a year for Bible, and then he went to Tennessee Temple for a few years. I forget where he got his master's, but he got a master's in theology. So from his standpoint, he's a first generation Christian, and he feels called into the ministry. Long story short, he wants to be a missionary, but God cuts his plans. He ends up becoming a pastor, but um, he ends up coming to Monroe, Wisconsin, because they needed a pastor. And this church has had a history, a not very good history. And it used to have a school, and it does not anymore because of a pastor who did a certain thing with a child. And so it's a big fat stain, not only on Baptist name, but also on the church itself.
Hmm.
And it's literally right across from an elementary school. So, which was built, I believe, after the church was built. Yes, like probably like 30 years. So it's been here actually for quite a while. But ultimately, my dad kind of took on all of this crud after one of the last pastors who tried to fix some issues but wasn't really able to, because it was like, I think, two or three pastors before him, three pastors. Um, and so I was probably 4 years old. I remember maybe three when we had moved here. And I remember even like going back and forth from Columbia. It was like a 2.5 hour drive to here. And then we'd stay the afternoon in the parsonage, nothing inside of it except like a TV and a DVD player. And then we would drive back at night, get home at like 10 o'clock, and then all go to bed. And then I grew up with a lot of bus kids, and they were an immense handful. Bus kids, I think you're aware, are just, they come from not the greatest conditions. And so a lot of times they take it out either on their teachers or on their supposed friends. And I got the blunt of it from a lot of them. I wasn't necessarily treated in a respectful sense for a very, very, very long time. And sure, I'm fine with that. I get love from my family. But having siblings isn't really I have 4 siblings and we're immensely competitive, still are. And so the love part wasn't necessarily there, except for like my grandma, my mom, and my dad. My grandma lived with us. And so I had really only a very small source of love, because the people in the church, although some of them were very kind and I could tell really loved the Lord, I was, and I say this with a bit of exaggeration, abused physically, not in any sexual way, but just not treated nicely by some of the adults. They were just very rough and didn't really understand. They're just grown-ups who don't have children don't usually understand that children have limits and are very tender. And so I was hurt a lot because of this. And even just as I continued to grow older, and then these bus kids are growing older, probably getting meaner and meaner. And I would always help just around the church because we're in a smaller church. I'm a pastor's kid. Okay. We're not running the church, but we're doing a lot of things in it. So I'm like helping out with the bus ministry. I'm on the bus, just helping pick up kids, just being there as a kid to like invite them to bring them along, which I think is funny now because I actually still pick up people today. So I've been doing that ever since I've been at the church, just going on vehicles to get people and people who don't have vehicles, helping out in our like kids program. And I just, with my peers, and even I told you we lived next to a school. So we'd have kids at like 3 o'clock when they get out, they're playing on the playground. And some of them would treat me fine, but I remember this specific instance, and this really kind of plays into my whole doubting season, is that I was just outside playing in the evening, and these kids were out there, and they were absolute bullies, knocked me on the head with a metal baseball bat, had a really bad wound. I was so hurt. I was ganged up on. I never had friends. I never did. And because of that, it was really hard for me to be social, especially around even just not necessarily church people, but especially my peers. And I felt always treated as less of a human for ultimately who I was. I felt like I was small, insignificant. I was always a bit short. I was really thin when I was young, and then when I got to about 13, got really chubby. Probably about 12, got really chubby. And I was called fatty or chubby by adults, not just kids that were my age.
Wow.
But adults in the church. And it didn't necessarily go well with my mom or my dad. But my dad, being a very soft and kind-hearted person, like he is seriously one of the most kind-hearted people you will ever meet. I'm extremely blessed to have a father like him, because I know so many, even just Christian kids, literally my cousins, don't have a dad like I do, and have to go through all that crud with their father. In my case, I didn't have to go through that with my mom and dad. I had to go through that with church people who were not being Christian. And all these bus kids that like I know they're not, but then these adults who are supposed to be Christians weren't being Christians. So I saw firsthand. I was there. I was being hurt by Christians not being Christians. This was something I just had at the very early part of my life. So I always looked down on unbelievers, especially my peers. I treated them oftentimes as dirt. One time, I always tell people this, that one time in Sunday school, one bus kid he looked at me with just this like scowl. I looked at him back with a worse scowl, and I punched his tooth out in Sunday school. My mom was absolutely furious, and boy, I got a swatting. And he never came back, and I wonder why. But it's just like I treated him double what he treated me. I just gave it back double. And that's really what I did with a lot of them. I appreciated my teacher and my teachers. And even then, I had trouble with my teachers too, just being legalistic and just not being like, not really loving the Lord with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength, which to me was like, it wasn't that big of a deal because I saw genuine Christianity in my mom and my dad because I knew their story. My dad has preached it many times. I know, and I've learned even now more what they've gone through, just immense pain, but yet they, regardless of the size of the church, regardless of the paycheck, because my dad doesn't get paid by the church. He's been doing this for years. People want him to get paid, but he just can't. He works a second job, and he works very hard, and all he really wants is to glorify God. And because of that, I had this good example of a real Christian who doesn't care about the money and is actually doing this even though people are terrible. And he is seeking to help them, even though a lot of times they don't want to help themselves at all. And so then I had a lot of instances really of just bitterness and hatred. That was my really first part of doubting. It wasn't that I looked at them and thought, oh man, these guys are so fake, Christianity must be fake. I mean, I didn't think of it in that sense because I realized that just as I am imperfect, they're imperfect. I may call myself a Christian and be all self-righteous, but I know in reality that I'm a wicked sinner and I need Jesus just like everyone else. That was something I learned early on. I just didn't act it out at all. I still acted extremely self-righteous around my peers and just very prideful. That's still an issue today for me, is my pride, really. But then, man, I lost my train of thought. But then there were these instances when I was a bit younger that we watched these archaeology videos, just that things that my dad had learned, and he wanted us to watch them. Kent Hovind was also a big thing that I watched a lot. Yep. I feel kind of really bad about watching him, although maybe I think he does have some good things to say. He just is so utterly controversial that it's hard to really talk good about him. But, I understand that, he's messed up. He's not Jesus.
I actually went and saw him in person once.
Really?
Yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah,
probably around 2000.
So you were still a Christian then.
Yeah. Well, I went to the same Bible college that his son did, Eric Obind. I was I was a year, maybe 2 years after him. I think we're pretty much the same age, but yeah, I went to the same place. Yeah,
that is very cool, actually. Yeah, because I watched the Kent Hovind DVDs about why evolution doesn't work before he was put in jail. For the whole tax thing. And that was also when I heard about that, I was like so disappointed. I'm like, you're supposed to be a Christian, man. Stop doing this. Stop because you're supposed to be a good example
Right.
to other people. Like you have responsibilities. You can't just I realized even then that that was a choice that you made, even as a Christian, is that you can choose to be like everyone else, or you can choose to seek God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. So to me, in my mind, I looked at it like this: it's partly God coming after you, and partly you making the decision to actually follow Him.
Mm.
And again, even though I knew this as a kid in knowledge, I didn't practice this. I was just as fake as everyone else. Although I did learn quite a bit of evidence early on, I actually learned more than I can realize. But I will say that archaeology has always been a big step forward for me in actually believing its, I guess, the trueness of it. It's always been kind of a big thing for me is just archaeology. I actually have an archaeological study Bible from Crossway. It's
Okay.
super good.
So
Um,
you wouldn't say then that archaeology was one of your doubts that you've
no,
struggled with?
no. My issue really was more on the spiritual end. My doubt was in my own myself. Is
Mm.
that I didn't see God in me, and it became very evident to me when I was probably about 12. We have this historian that comes every year. His name is Dr. David Saxon. He actually works at Maranatha University. Super cool guy, friend of the family. Um, and one thing I do want to mention, we have never been a fundamentalist church, although you could call us fundamental in terms of theology. It's never been like some people there are King James only, but my mom and dad certainly aren't that. My mom grew up like that, but music was always like more conservative. But I learned that
Hmm.
my dad listened to like 80s Steve Green, and I listened to it today and Stephen Curtis Chapman. I'm like, wait, why did I have all these weird standards in my head? Because I got like super hyper fundamentalists when I was about 18. But when I was about 12, so he this historian was just preaching. He has like a lesson early in the morning, and then in our night service, and then he preaches for the main service. And he just preached the gospel like normal, but for some reason, from him specifically, I really respected him. And I always loved the missionary stories, the stories about evangelists, like, and I just had this unique respect for him. And the way he put it was just in a way that, like, it just like clicked in my head. And so I went to my mom kind of, although I had earlier actually gotten baptized and made a confession of faith and talked to my mom and dad. Yeah, I want to accept Jesus. Um, Although I do think that that most likely was the time I actually trusted in Christ. I didn't understand the full weight at that age of actually giving my life to God. And so this was kind of when I really gave my life to God. And I just said, God, I'm going to give you everything about me because I have been fake. I've been a phony. And so then that doubt just kind of, it's still kind of there. I still, I have this obsessive personality with a lot of things. I don't know if you noticed that at all. Probably not. You'd have to know me pretty well. Just a little bit. I'm that way about Jesus. My shirt actually says, it's like, changed my life. Ask me about him or ask me
Okay.
about it. Um, but essentially that was when I really saw this change in me. I was still very self-righteous, very prideful, but I noticed like I could actually see change in my life. It was literally evidence for me. Being a very more physical, material kind of person, just how I'm very like not necessarily math as much as just I love biology. I love chemistry. Well, maybe not chemistry as much, but apparently I was good at it. Physics, especially, love physics. Just adore it. And I mean, you start talking about Newton's laws, I'm geeking out with you. Um, and so, like, I want want to have this flow of logic. I want to be able to understand this for myself. So once I started actually seeing this difference, I was like, hold on a second. This scripture is literally coming alive in my life. So then years down the road, I know that is a long story, but it leads up to me going through really this hard time with like not having any friends as a teenager, and ultimately really focusing on Jesus, him being my close friend, and really just ignoring the fact that I don't necessarily need someone physical here. I do have my family, but my relationship with Christ is, in a sense, therapeutical, but also it's because it started with me giving my life to him and him changing my life. And so I'm just like, all right, I am going to give everything to you. I started reading my Bible a lot. At 14, I was reading my Bible 3 hours a day. For a 14-year-old, that is insane. I would fall asleep a lot at night when I would start reading. I'd have like Leviticus open and just like clock out in 10 minutes. But I would just absolutely engulfing it, trying to understand it, and despising reading. I still kind of do. I really don't like reading much. I'd rather watch a lecture that's 5 hours long than read for 20 minutes.
Yep.
So then when I was 18, I told you about that. I was kind of hyper fundamentalist. And for some reason, thinking that the King James is just the absolute best translation out there with absolutely no evidence for that. Just, well, it's the King James. That was my argument. And so I came out from that just questioning, like, is it actually the best translation? And so, now I actually use an ESV primarily and an NASB. At my church, it's still King James. But I came out from that kind of tunnel. And I thank God for that, because I've learned so much more because of it. I can actually understand my Bible. But then I also had the season of with music, and just like, Southern gospel is like the limit, but otherwise like Maranatha, West Coast, Hiles, like very minimal. Christian rap is not Christian rap. It's just rap where they put Jesus words into it. And now that's different for me. Now I've changed. It's because I question, like, do I actually have evidence for this? Can I build a case scripturally for this type of music? I couldn't. The only type of, at least the only thing that I could ever think of was that you need to praise God from your heart. It needs to be essentially from an extension of the heart and in terms of praise. And so now I listen to Christian rap. Forrest Frank is my favorite Christian rap artist. I listen to some modern stuff. I do prefer a lot of the more conservative stuff, but so I moved out of that tunnel, and that's all just from my natural skepticism. I just naturally have this, like, I question absolutely everything. And I look at something and I'm like, how does this work? I want to pick this apart. I want to like, if I don't understand it, it drives me insane. If I don't understand something, if I can't wrap my head around it. So that was even like when I was learning about computers in physics, they were telling me like how a computer works. And I'm just like, no, go in more detail. I want the college level stuff, please. And I couldn't understand it. It was driving me nuts. I'm like, I want to know, how did the electrons I learned this later, but how do the electrons make bytes? Like, how do you get bytes out of electrons? And so it's like, yeah, I still don't completely understand it to this day, but I just it was just something that I had. And I learned actually as when I was 18, I did a physics class, and this was part of the doubting that I went through. I had learned about evolution and actually heard many good arguments, not just from Kent Hovind, of course, good arguments from my standpoint, and also from the science that I did, the biology, chemistry, physics was the first one I did. I think I was 16 when I did that my first year in high school. And then 18, I went through a dual credit course, which I believe actually taught evolution, I think. It didn't do much because it was actually rocket science and astrophysics.
okay.
I think it was rocket science and astrophysics. I did a dual credit course. By the way, rocket science is so easy. It's way easier than chemistry. I'll just tell you that. At least advanced chemistry. Advanced chemistry is just because it gets involved with calculus. It's so easy to you just have to remember the equations and the variables. It's just once you remember that, I mean, you're getting all of it down just like trigonometry. It's super quick, super easy. You just have to have good memory. And so
I'll take your word for it.
but I did enjoy it. I didn't get the greatest grade. It was a B plus. I really wanted an A, but it was my own fault. I went too fast in some of the math tests. But then they started teaching about the Big Bang. Now, I think you understand from a Christian standpoint, the Big Bang, really? From, fundamentalist Christian standpoint, this is through Liberty University. So I'm like, okay, they're a more secular university. They're going to have some secular textbooks. And I'm going through this, and they give me essentially a task. I get to do some of the math myself. I get to use Einstein's theory of relativity to essentially come to in a small level, the singularity theorems that Roger Penrose and Stephen Hawking's, they worked out. They did all this. They used Einstein's field equations. And so I got to do some of the math, which is like so cool to me. And I actually was convinced at that point of the Big Bang. Of course, I didn't necessarily think in millions of years. I was like, okay, either the Bible, it just, because it's not specific about the age of the earth, and this is actually what my dad thinks too, it could be trillions of years, but it doesn't say. So in that sense, like there's room for God to be the big banger and for everything to start, then from there, God to be the catalyst. But of course, I didn't think there was any good evidence for evolution. I didn't really have any proper reason to believe. I definitely believed in adaptation. I had seen tons of evidence for that. I also know that adaptation gets construed with this like neo-Darwinian evolution of changing from one animal into another animal, or as Christians will say, changing of kinds. And so I just didn't see that. I just saw adaptation, Big Bang. Not very many people, especially my mom, were like, you believe in the Big Bang, really? And then my sister comes into it, starts arguing with me and yelling at me. And so that was the thing. That was the competitive nature. So it wasn't a doubt as much as like, I need to read the Bible in a different way than I have been. So that was just like almost like stage 2. And not even, it was kind of all around the same period that I'm going from like a more evangelical ideology or theology instead of this fundamentalist Baptist. And it worried my mom a lot, especially questioning Bible translations, because she grew up in the fundamentalist circles, King James onlyists. And they have conferences in Oshkosh for the King James Bible and why it's the best translation. I think it's a waste of time and money. I think you should be focusing on more important things like helping our current homeless situation in Wisconsin is really bad. And I'm certain they do. I know a lot of those pastors, they do really have a philanthropist's heart. But it's just like, to me, it's like kids are dealing with depression, suicide. They don't necessarily care about the Bible translation. They need help in a lot more other areas, if you know what I mean.
Right.
So I know I'm talking a lot more than you probably at this point. Well, actually, no. But anyways, to keep going, then when I was 20, I met a girl who was from my uncle's church in Madison. And I really only got interested in her from someone else that I was going out evangelizing with. I would help my uncle in kind of that church in evangelizing. This is after I had started my YouTube channel in 2021. So in 2022, I would go to Madison almost every Thursday in the summer. And then I would help them out in the evenings. And I even did it in the winter sometimes too. Freezing cold, 20 below in Madison is, I mean, and then doing an interview, like you
Yeah.
start stuttering and like not actually finishing your sentences or words because your mouth is frozen. That was fun. But so then I had met her just off of kind of being us placed together at the same spot, and I knew this, and she kind of knew this too, just from this guy that I evangelized with, and still very, very great guy. But the first time we really, like, you could call it a date, but we went to Culver's. Just all of us, my family, her family. She had actually come to my church one night when I preached, actually. So she got
Oh,
to,
wow.
that was my dad's idea the night before. So he's just like, oh, she's coming tomorrow? You want to preach? I'm just like, what?
Wow.
Yeah. So I had to prepare that in the afternoon, and in all things considered, I think it was a great sermon in that it was very personal to me. I was going through a very trying time in my spiritual life, extremely, and I mean extremely difficult. And ultimately, God has got me through that. That wasn't a doubting season. That was just dealing with other things. But I had said, I think the King James needs to be updated for some reason. And I forgot these are fundamentalists, and you don't know, depending on the fundamentalists, that might be the most offensive thing you could ever say. She was mad. She was really mad. She yelled at me. And so I don't blame them in their attitude, because they look at the King James translation as, okay, this is God's holy word. You put the King James translation down, you're putting God's word down. Whereas in my mind, no, it's just an English translation of the manuscripts that we have. I knew this. I also understood at that point a decent amount about the variants. I knew a lot more than the average 20-year-old Christian. I was extremely blessed. My dad, knowing theology, having a master's degree, he knew all this. He knew all this about Greek and Hebrew. He knows about he doesn't really talk about it much, but he knows very well about all the variants in the manuscripts. And so which he did actually.
When you're saying that from the pulpit, you're, in their perspective, you're a heretic.
Yes. Yeah.
So it looks really bad. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, I know when he does Bible studies, my dad is so funny because he doesn't do a Bible study. He gives you a personal sermon. He doesn't just talk nice and quiet. And I kind of get this from him too. When he gets going, he is preaching to the person he's doing a study with, but it's very engaging, and he goes over so much. I mean, he just envelops you with knowledge, wisdom. I mean, he goes really deep into scripture. And if that's something you're asking, how did the Bible come to be? He'll tell you, he'll give you all the details, and he's great about that. So that was something that no, it's still not preached, which I really wish that we did have more of that in the pulpits, where it's just, we're being clear. Hey guys, these translations, and this is how you get King James onlyists, is because they're not taught that the King James translation comes from the Textus Receptus, which is just a collection of Hebrew and Greek manuscripts that have variants. They have differences. So you have to take the time to, first of all, understand the languages and the cultures in order to group together and figure out which words should be where, and say a word's missing in one manuscript, you have to take from the other, and maybe that one's different. You have one that's different. And so understand, okay, what works in the context, then you get into dynamic equivalence. And so it's just, they didn't know this. And so it ended up leading into them confronting me in their mind, spiritual way, and me being kind of a sensitive person of having adults talk down to me, was extremely hurt. And it just led to this immense amount of doubting. Long story short, I'm not allowed to really talk to her because I don't think the King James is a good translation. I mean, I think it's a good translation, but I don't think it's the best.
Yeah.
And I use an ESV and an NASB, so unless I supposedly repent of that, I'm sorry. That's kind of degrading, but
Well, it's
it's
very
just
unfortunate. It's very unfortunate.
yeah. And she was nice, but I will say that even my whole family said this. She is not for you, Samuel. She's a nice girl, but she is not for you. And that was before the whole King James
Hmm.
issue. And I kind of agreed with them. It's just with me not having friends and only really having love from my parents. At this point, I did have love from my siblings. Took a while, but it was also partly my fault. And so, like, I just want someone, and I still feel the same. It's hard for me, but I'm doing better now. But I constantly battle with the depression of not having a physical close friend that I could just lay everything out on the table to.
Yeah.
And so a girlfriend to me is like, oh, that's awesome. I can give her my entire heart. But me being obsessive goes overboard. And so I did a little bit with her where I just gave her a little too much. I'd actually been hurt by a girl a few years prior. So that still hangs on. And so,
So
but
I never. Sorry, I'll have to interrupt
no,
if I
that's
have
fine.
anything. I never asked you how old you are.
Oh, I am 22 now. In March 6th, I will be 23.
Okay. So,
So
I mean, you got plenty of time.
that's
I
what
didn't.
everyone tells me.
Well, it's yeah, but it's true, man. Like I didn't get married till 35.
Oh, okay. Well, and you did tell me that you did your faith journey was in 2016. So I would kind of guess,
Yeah.
and you're around Eric Hovde's age. So I would kind of guess you're a bit older. Um,
I'm 41 right now.
okay. So middle
it-
aged, younger than
y-
my dad.
yeah, yeah. What?
He's
Okay, yeah.
51. He's 52 on Monday. Interesting that it's the inauguration day. So it might be a good thing or a bad thing.
Who knows? It'll be a cold
Anyways,
day, that's for sure.
I really hope that World War III doesn't break out. You always have these like ideas in the back of your head, like, Hamas has been planning this day and then like show up at the inauguration, shoot Trump all of his office,
Yeah.
take over America, and then like World War
You know
III.
what, man? Big stuff like that doesn't seem to really happen. We dream about it, but it never happens.
But
I'd be surprised.
yeah, I would be very surprised. But I know my little brother would be like, "I told you," but just because he's 18, so he's just like that.
Well, the
Um,
reason I didn't get married till 35 is because I came from a family that preached it real hard, like brainwashing level, that you get married once you have a career and you don't get a career until you go to
oh,
college and you don't leave home until you get married. So
mm,
you're like stuck here in limbo if you don't have a degree and a career. And like I finally had to move out at 28,
yeah,
and I
I
was never in a position to date because I still had that hanging over my head that if you're not financially successful, you have no business entertaining marriage.
yeah.
So you just have to break free from that stuff, and it took a long time.
Yeah, thankfully, I did not have that, and I know that that does very well exist. I haven't seen it much, and I have seen actually a lot of Baptists turning to more evangelical theology, which I'm just so glad. I'm like, yes, please, we need to kind of
Hmm.
loosen up a little bit, not be so legalistic, okay? This is like to me, just read Romans. It's like basic theology, and just I love Romans. It's my honestly my favorite book, at least when it comes to like intellectual level theology. But to
Well,
me,
that
it's
presents a
sorry,
yeah, sorry. That presents a question that I have for you about
sure.
Romans. Um, w- did you ever doubt, or ever did Romans 9 ever bother you? Was that ever a source of doubt?
Mm, in a sense, it's funny because I did a podcast on this probably about a year ago. Yeah, I did chapter 9. And I had all the usual Calvinists on there typing in, but I call them keyboard warriors because for some reason they just have nothing else to do but reply to my like
Yeah.
one or two comments, and they just do like these super long. It's just so funny. You find those people on the internet.
Well, unfortunately, there's not a very effective way to communicate as an alternative.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, it's not like they can call you up or do something different.
Yeah, it is hard because you can't show your emotions. Like you can't, even just gestures, right? You can't show that when you're typing this in, right? I
Right.
was wondering if you could like take the time to like add gesture and emoticon for each thing. I've seen people do that. It's really weird, but
It's a terrible way to communicate, but I mean, most of the time, it's all we've got when it's online.
sure, yeah. And I mean, you and I talked through comments first, and then eventually,
Right.
came to this. So, and it just helps so much to just talk face to face for real. Because then it's like, oh, you're a human? I thought you were a bot. I
Exactly.
thought you were a satire bot,
And you never know. You never know what somebody really is, or I mean, so a kind of a side note here.
Hmm.
During my experience, like I did a lot of online dating,
Hmm. Oh, really?
and I did, yeah, and I got catfished like really hardcore by a woman in her 60s, and
I'm so sorry.
she was using her daughter's pictures and pretending to be somebody completely different, and she strung me along for several months, and before I finally figured it out, and it's just
Sorry, I'm listening.
lying. You just can't know, and I I wouldn't say it was a source of doubt, but it was like, why is God doing this to me? Like, what was the purpose of this? And the ironic thing was, she was a Baptist as well. When I finally, figured out who she was and I confronted her with it, she wanted to have an emotional affair, but she wasn't like, I don't know, she didn't feel confident enough to go out and do it for real, so she was doing it online. And I'm like, after everything I've told you about my testimony and everything we've shared, over the phone. Like this, I find out that you're a fellow Christian and you're a Baptist, and this, like, I couldn't understand it. I'm like, why would? Yeah,
Yeah,
didn't
no,
make sense at the time.
yeah, I actually have a close friend who kind of went through some of that, and but yeah, it's just to me again, I still understand it. I it to me it's like in science how you with your experiments you have an ideal version, but then you have reality. And to me,
Mhm.
it's like you have the ideal that Christians act similar to Christ, but in reality they don't. And so to me, that's not evidence that it isn't true. That's just evidence that people are really messed up. Um, and so,
For for me, it's evidence against the power of the gospel because, like I said before, as a whole, there should be some kind of difference, but
yes.
statistically, there is no. In fact, statistically, oftentimes Christians are worse. The Deep South is one of the most religious regions in the country, and it has the highest rate of violence, domestic violence, alcoholism, and drug abuse.
Yeah. And
Like,
honestly,
why?
um, there's so much dogmatism, and then they don't deal with their issues. Um, I mean, me understanding this, I pray for revival in the Christians every single day because that's what I want to see. Um, but I know that in a psychological sense, when you get comfortable where you are, you see no reason to change your life in any way. Doesn't matter from any standpoint. This is how people get to obese levels. It's just this is why a lot of you need therapy. It's not even like someone who's anorexic, right? They need mental help. Um, they don't need fat taken out or some kind of surgery that would take the last of their fat out, right? You'd essentially just be hurting them in doing that. Instead, it's therapeutical. It's in
Hmm.
their mind, and it's just the road that they've chosen because of. I mean, there's so many factors, but honestly, it's just the society where it's a good thing to go to Burger King, McDonald's. You have the immense amount of, and it's like it's praised like comfort is praise above what's really important. And that ultimately is what I see, especially in Monroe. I see constantly these religious people putting their comfort, and like even just how someone will say no to me to an interview, or even people I'll interview who are supposedly Catholic or Christian, and just hate me after the interview. I've had only a few instances of that, but it's because like I'm telling them, listen, you're in danger, you need to change. And they're like, I don't want to change. I love my life the way it is. Why are you telling me to be different? I'm telling you about myself, and then you're telling me to change. So to them, it's like, it's the whole trust your heart thing. They're taught, even just especially the movie space, which are so influential, that you are great just as you are. You don't need to do anything to change yourself. Now, I see this is, of course, not in everyone, but this is so ingrained in our culture that's why America, I think, not even just on a spiritual level. Of course, I think certainly on a spiritual level, but just like on an intellectual level. I look at schools. We just fallen so far down this hole, and so many people just don't care. Excuse me for saying this online, but this isn't a swear word, but they don't give a crud. It's just, they really don't. And I'm like, to me, as an obsessive person, that floors me. And that's really where I saw this as a competition. I saw this as these people aren't doing anything, so I'm going to go and do it. That's why I started evangelizing, really, was from the sense of nobody else is doing this, so I'm going to do it.
Well, Samuel, if you are an exception, clearly, and you shouldn't be the exception. I really feel like if there was something to this, that there would be a lot more of you. And there's not. And I think that exposes a bigger problem that's going on here, because there is an alternative hypothesis, and it's that they don't really believe.
Yes, which I also do think a lot of times, I think real belief brings action. And
well, this is what I thought we were actually going to talk about today, because I had mentioned this in a message to you about my new conclusion here. I'm done arguing with Christians.
Right.
I'm done debating them. I'm done giving evidence. I'm done presenting anything. I'm totally done, because it's been almost 7 years of me debating and arguing with Christians of all types wherever I find them, and I have not once had any results at all. Just as you have had apparently very few results yourself, the attitudes you're getting, I'm getting the same frustration from my interactions with Christians. And the election really exposed this idea to me, because in the lead up to it, so much stuff going on, so much propaganda on both sides, so much news, fake or otherwise. And I realized, like in the week leading up to it, that people don't care about the truth.
Here, just a
They
second.
just
I have
don't.
to turn off my camera. My battery's about to die. Sorry.
Okay. Do you need to? I mean, are you able to plug it in? How much time have we got?
It is plugged in. It's just consuming a lot of juice. So
okay. Do we have limited time?
Probably like a half an hour, and I did still have to finish up.
Okay.
So
yeah, go ahead. I'll let you finish up.
You're talking about good stuff. I was gonna say, we could almost like gang up on just people who don't care, because it's like from your side, it's like Christians who don't care, and then from my side, it's like Christians and unbelievers who just don't care. And
well, what I've got is a pretty lengthy. I wouldn't call it an argument, but a hypothesis, and I've got at least 7 different lines of evidence to go through to prove what I'm wanting to say. So perhaps it's better saved for another time, because it's pretty involved. So I'll you can go ahead and finish.
Okay. Yeah, we can definitely save that for another time, and I would certainly like to hear
it's to me, it's really important, because it's my final conclusion. And I know that's to say that is pretty arrogant because I mean everybody comes to new conclusions and changes their
Oh,
mind on stuff. But as far as my adventure here in this project, this is my what I can see is my final conclusion, and I don't think I'm going to go any further than this.
mm.
I actually wrote a book back in 2020. It's about 270 pages. I don't know if I've told you about it before,
Yeah,
but
you did.
yeah, the title was how to Stop Being a Christian, and it was me trying to compile all of the evidence and the arguments in a way that a Christian could read through it like a devotional, and they would have their world re-challenged.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
but
interesting. I'm sorry.
it was it was in where I'm at today. Like it was completely futile project, and I'm just done. Um, so anyway, it was kind of a sidetrack. Go ahead.
Well, and I will say this, and this is something that at least I've learned, when I share the gospel, because I've shared the gospel with hundreds of people and had great conversations, and I thought it would go somewhere, and it never
Mm,
did. You don't know the consequences that those things can have, either good or bad. I realize that from your standpoint, Christians coming away is like good for you, but it might even like draw Christians closer because it'll lead them from doubt, and then they'll ultimately seek God more and find answers. So, I
I
mean, you
don't
don't
think
know the final
they
consequences, but
right,
because
but my
I was just,
claim is that I don't think Christians believe it at all.
oh,
Yeah, that's my conclusion,
like
and I
all
can prove that.
Christians or just majority?
Pretty much. I think the only true Christians are the ones that walk away because they
Oh,
cared so much that it was true. They had to find out.
interesting.
The ones that are left behind, I honestly I know I'm questioning motives here and I'm judging, I'm like inside people's heads, but like I was there myself and I've been inside people's heads as much as I can when I talk to them, and I see their actions and I listen to their words, and I just don't think they believe it. Like
Right.
on an actual core level of belief, in the same way they believe something like they believe after work they're going to the grocery store. Like they get their pocketbook out, they got their cash, they gas their car, they're gonna go to the grocery. They believe it like a reality. I
Yeah.
don't think they believe it on that same level.
Mm,
I think something else is going on.
yeah. That's
And I can
interesting.
prove that. I've got 7 lines of evidence.
Well, we have to definitely go through that at some point because I'd certainly like to hear it. I do
Yeah.
want to still finish up, and I hate to interrupt you, but
No, go
um,
ahead, man. This is your
we
ball game.
yeah, we got off on the whole marriage thing, and like I talked about how the one girl that I got to know, like her parents confronted me about the whole King James thing, and then but I went through after that this like, and it was a lot of hurt. It really was. It felt a lot similar to things that I had when I was a kid. Um, and so I went through this immense doubting season about really just the integrity of. It's not like I don't do this anyways. I question the integrity of scripture a lot, and in a very unusual sense. Like in a
Mm,
year, probably like last year, I did it. It was an extra amount. It was probably like maybe 50 to 60 times. In 2022, it was probably like 30 times. I just went through this like this existential thought, like what if it's all wrong? And then actually like thinking it through and proper like seeking answers to specific questions. And so it's just something I do a lot. I think I am personally just a natural kind of skeptical person because I'm
mm,
not that way necessarily socially, but especially when it comes to anything that presents itself to be true, but it's written down as like paper. So such
mm.
as physics or mathematics. Um, so like uh, I essentially had my uncle. My mom had called another uncle. I have 3 uncles that are pastors. So
Wow.
yeah, so it's and they're all in a sense, fundamentalists, some more than others. But yeah, fundamentalist Baptists and amazing men. I mean, just very, very great men, very kind, loving to so many people. And really, those are the kind of people as well that I've had in my life who also don't care about the paycheck. And I know they don't. I've seen it for myself. They certainly have their flaws. But anyways, so my Uncle Fred came, and because mostly he wanted to see, he wanted an excuse to see my mom. And so then he came over, just talked to me essentially at least why he loves the King James. Now, he also has a master's in theology, like my dad. He studied Greek. He knows the manuscripts. He apparently has almost every single Bible translation under the sun. And he had most of them in the bag that he brought. Like, he had a lot of them. I was very surprised. And he's read actually quite a few. And so to him, it was more of a personal preference, is just he liked the way that the King James worded it. To me, I'm like, okay, that's great, but like, why? Why do you want to use the King James? Right? If that's just personal opinion, okay, but why not just use a modern translation and this is still my point today, why not just use a modern translation that does it better? Because we have more manuscripts, we have more information, we also have a better understanding of the Greek and Hebrew culture, and also the culture of even the Babylonians and just the surrounding areas. And so it's like, the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in, what was it, like 1946 or something like that.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, now we have these documents as well. And I learned from there, because I had my NASB at this point. Isaiah is different. It's not like different to the point where it literally changes the whole meaning, but it's just, it's worded differently to get a similar idea. And when you read it as a whole, you understand it as the same. But it's almost like my dad preaching one sermon and then my uncle preaching the same sermon, but in his own way. It's kind of like that. And so I knew it was also partly just the translation philosophy. NASB is different and also much newer too. But then I also got an ESV. And so to me, it's like, why not just use the NASB? Because it's more literal. It has more information than the King James. Why not just use that? And so I never, ever, ever got a proper answer to that question, at least that I deemed worthy. And, I talked about proper flow of logic. That has still been, it's more now that I will argue with people who are King James onlyists, to no avail. But but the point is, to me, it's like the ESV is like a better King James. It's a similar philosophy from the translators, and it's like we have more information. It's like, why not just use that? So, but anyways, then from there, 2024 came, and I made a video that was on evolution. I haven't studied it for years. I still had the same arguments. There isn't really any proper evidence for neo-Darwinian evolution, or what I called macroevolution. That's how, like Kent Hovind, Frank Turek word it. It makes sense. And I've actually heard scientists, like not just Christian, but also call it that: micro versus macro, adaptation versus neo-Darwinian, changing of kinds over time, the same ancestor. And I just made a video essentially claiming there isn't any archaeological evidence for it, for changing of kinds. Even I always go back to this quote from Charles Darwin himself. He said that if this theory is true, or if this hypothesis is true, I forget exactly how he words it, but he said there should be an innumerous amount of transitional types just laying on fields, but we do not find any yet. And he said, if none are found, then this theory is false. And so to me, it's like, okay, you set it up, and I have never seen any in something that I can like say reputably this is genuinely a transition type. And even then, I would say at least 10. And then sure, I'll believe it. But even then, I also understood, well, even if evolution is true, right, the neo-Darwinian evolution, that doesn't mean God doesn't exist or that Christianity isn't true, maybe from my mom's standpoint, but not from my standpoint. But that's not how I grew up. I grew up with evolution is an evil, wicked idea, and it comes from Satan. And so I came up with this video on the comments. Man, I don't know if you've heard this saying before, but don't ever attack the sacred cow of evolution. Man, I don't know if you've heard
Yeah.
that, but it's
So
just
I
like,
haven't heard it, but there are a lot of sacred cows you're not
yeah,
supposed to attack.
oh
And
yeah,
everywhere.
yeah. It's just dogmatism, you know. It's
Yeah.
human nature, which is kind of sad. Cooper, what are you doing? I'm sorry, I have to let my dog out.
Okay.
I let Cooper out. I'm sorry, he's bothering me. Okay, he was like, I think he wants food, but he was getting crazy. So to finish up, major doubts going through my head because I'm not seeing their emotions in the comments. I'm just seeing what I think I'm seeing is just spite, hatred, this prideful dogmatism that I had when I was young, and it scared me. It scared me really hard. And even though I understood all of their arguments, and I knew even just from reading them, I'm like, absolutely none of these have any proper flow of logic. They're not even watching the whole video. The 99% of them, you can tell they didn't even watch the video because I just talked about literally everything that they just object to. So yeah, sure, you can disagree. And I had Christians in there too saying that, like, I disagree with you, but I think it's great what you're doing. But it just, then I made a few other videos, and this is actually around the time that I had the debate with,
Ted the Atheist.
thank you, Ted the Atheist.
Yeah. That's how I found you.
Right, exactly. And then I met you, and even the first conversation we had, I was going through this immense amount of doubt, just immense. I mean, you could see the doubt in me and on me. I mean, it was so hard. It wasn't just like, oh, I had a little bit. It's like, I'm not just questioning everything. I'm questioning my questioning, which I also do from time to time, but in a deeper emotional way, like scared about it. And my mom also dealing with it in the same sense because she's kind of my therapist. My mom is amazing. I can kind of vent to her, and she'll listen really well. But when she gets it, she doesn't take it in necessarily the most pleasantful way because of how she's grown up. And she understands that, and she's getting really good at listening now. She also understands she's much better than what she used to be. But it's like,
we have a similar mother experience. Let's put it like that.
Nice. Yeah, and it's funny that you have the same chair as I do.
That's not necessarily good.
No, but I mean, if your mom's great, but I see what you mean. But no,
I won't talk too much about that.
I'll just put it like that. You mean about the bad stuff? Okay, I wasn't thinking that. I was thinking like about the nice stuff. You were referring like, oh yeah, we have a similar mother.
I won't make any assumptions. But,
no,
I mean, sometimes it's easy to read between the lines.
Sure.
Sometimes, yeah.
And my mom really is a good example, and how to, even though you absolutely can completely disagree, you're nice about it.
You come from a German lineage?
Very. Yes, I am like 70% German.
There you go, man.
Yeah. Are you pretty German?
My family is very much from the German background, and that does come out in the way they deal with people.
Oh yeah,
So
it's very a dogmatic kind of thing.
Yeah, very harsh. It's very unkind. Yeah.
See, and my dad, it's actually really cool because my grandma's grandma was Native American, and my grandma's grandpa was from Germany. So kind of a weird mix. But my dad gets like all red in the summer. He gets like a red tan. You can see it. It's like, oh, he like has red skin.
Yeah.
But anyways, to continue with the story, just it was extremely hard on me in so many areas, and I'm still sharing the gospel as usual. It's just a thing that I'm constantly doing. But as I'm doing it, I'm like this like feeling this dark. This is very dark. I mean, I could call it a spirit, and I know you understand that, but it was like this weight that would come on me at times whenever I would go through any apologetics, even just sharing the gospel in general. I would wake up in the morning reading my Bible, and it would just come on me. It was as if a demon is literally just oppressing me, and I'm just having to deal with this guy constantly. And it was just so heavy. I'm not the greatest at communicating and just laying that out to other people until like years later, or in this case, 6 months later, actually giving someone the full story. I haven't to anyone else. And this all goes back to a mixture of all that I've had before and what I went through and my own self-righteousness and pride and doubting myself. And because of that, like, sure, I may know these things, but how can I trust myself?
I would just to throw this out there before you move too far past it. I would say don't discount the possibility that this is the logical part of your brain, the logical side of your brain, fighting you
Yes,
on
of course.
things that aren't evidently true in reality. Like,
yes,
because we're dealing with abstract concepts and invisible beings, the logical side of your brain. It's not necessarily the devil.
right. Yeah, and I agree with that. Yes, it was just that it was the logic, or the logic of the doubt came with the feelings. So it was connected, and I could understand from just doing Psychology 101, which I loved as well in college, that this is a level of it's not depression, it's something else, and I can't name it, but it is a typical thing for people. And it has to do with this certain age, when you're going about 18 to 23, you doubt absolutely everything that you are. And my dad had the same experience as well. I don't know if for women it's like a different age, but it's typically around there. Your brain is going through major reconstruction. So it was actually a lot of it. I knew this because I've just had this in the past like 3 years. I didn't have this 18 and before. I only had this recently, where my brain is reconstructing itself. I'm having to like feed it information about my own memories from when I was a kid. I've almost completely forgotten and remembered my entire childhood, like 3 times. And so I knew in psychology, this is actually a typical thing. This is just something that happens because your brain is changing from child to adult. And because of it, I've actually learned that I understand like the intellectual side of theology, philosophy, physics a lot better, which is great. I understand books a lot better. But, you know, I'm not trying to be prideful here. It's just a good consequence of it. But it was like that mixed with these things from the past, mixed with me genuinely doubting, because I want to genuinely doubt. To me, genuinely doubting is actually a great thing. I think it is extremely healthy, and I think every Christian should do it. Yes, doubt. Please doubt everything about who you are on a consistent basis. I realize that for every single person, it's different, and some it has major consequences. So I agree with you in the sense that we should be doubting, but it's so hard because certain people are so utterly dogmatic. If they were to actually put themselves through that, they might actually commit suicide. There are some major psychological consequences. So to me, some doubting is better than none at all. But in my case, okay, I want to challenge myself. I'm competitive with myself. Even I'm challenging myself. can I actually give a good case for Christianity? And so, long story short, I could do this from my memory, actually, from my head. I did have to like sit and think for a while over the span of probably about a month. And in fact, I did research before I did the debate with Mr. Ted. That also helped. I was just like, because even though I still had these feelings weighing on me, but I had all this evidence that, again, from my standpoint, I realized we disagree, but the evidence was like, yes, I know it's true, but and this was hard for me, I didn't feel its truth. And it was like my own self was against me in believing it. And I didn't really know why. And I knew it, and it all started with, I mean, literally bad arguments for evolution, just literally bad. And crazy amount of doubt. And there was this Christian song. I don't really listen to contemporary Christian, but this was one song that my brother pointed me to, and just a very hard day for me. And even when I listen to music, although it may be very emotional, I'm still very analytical about it and picking apart, what's the theology in this? What's he actually saying here? Right. And so then, but he said something in it where he's like, it's called Firm Foundation by Cody Carnes. And it reminded me of something. And this wasn't the turning point as much, but it reminded me of something. He said, he is faithful because I'm not quoting this right. He talked about how he is faithful and you can trust him because he has always been in the past. And I just thought about that for weeks on end and just thought, and this was also partly when I was actually just forgetting my childhood and remembering it and just thinking about all these small little instances that I know cannot be explained, actual miracles and things that I'm just like, I know in a sense, philosophically, you can explain anything away. But to me, what's the best explanation for this? And I think of when even I came to give my life to God and how it's changed me. And even when I share the gospel, it's something I mention a lot. And I just thought about that. I'm like, the evidence is so overwhelming on the side of Christianity. And again, this is what I went through, that I have no reason to have these doubts, although it's healthy. But even though I'm still going through it, I actually still do. In fact, right before I came to this, probably about a day ago, I had that attack again. It's been subsided. It's not near as bad as it used to be. But it's still like this fear in me. And I just have I've doubted more, but I've learned more. And I'm able to be more empathetic with people who are atheists, ex-Christians, because I understand it is so, doubting can be very strong. And depending on the person, if you don't understand even just the basic psychology, and in my case, I don't want to brag here. I really do not, but I have this unusual understanding of the human mind. And I'm able to use psychological tricks to conquer things that I have just never been able to do before, such as like being an immense introvert. I've been able to become an extrovert in certain scenarios in order to, say, share the gospel. I just use psychological tricks. And I can name them all off to you, but they're all like in my own way of doing psychology. And so this is also why I just naturally pick apart people's brains, whether from a distance or close. I don't know. It's just something I naturally do. I want to understand you. I want to pick you apart and like, why do you do the things you do? Is this me building computers? And so in the end, I will say that I give glory to God. He got me through it, but it's still something that I deal with. And it's just like some other issues that I've had in my life, even like fighting against depression because I don't really have a friend and I was treated really badly as a kid by my peers. Still deal with that today. But
you'll deal with that for the rest of your life, man.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Because I had a similar experience, and you can't you can never turn the corner on it fully. What happens to you in childhood will stick with you forever.
Yes, that you're so impressionable. It's literally a vase. You're practically a vase, just made out of clay. And once you're put in the oven, though, I mean, and I realize this is like a cheesy way of saying it, you're cooked. It's
Yeah,
just
it's true.
that's how you're defined then. So once you get to that point where your brain restructures, and I knew this as well also. And I understand where a lot of people get their dogmatism is that when they're impressioned as a kid and they don't deal with these issues early on or learn psychological tricks, they get fixated and completely and then 28 is the last year that you have. Once you're 28, everything is stuck. It's like a time limit for you to change essentially who you are. You still have this midlife crisis because your brain starts to degrade majorly at that point. And so you actually start losing some important memories, not just restructuring.
Yeah, it's called pruning.
Yeah. And so,
The frontal lobe fully develops around age 25.
yeah. Um, and I think the average, at least you're completely fully grown at like 28. So I think for
Mhm.
some guys it's like 36, if you know what I mean.
I was fortunate that I didn't go through my experiences until I was about 33,
Okay.
so that I didn't have to deal with the brain changes.
Yeah, I had it all at once. I mean, it was hardcore. And my mom crying, praying for me, but her tears didn't help me. I actually just, it was a mixture of me going to God and me just kind of getting over myself a bit and just saying, you know what? I think way too much of myself. I am not the center point of the universe.
Mhm.
Skepticism is extremely useful. But when it becomes all about myself, whether there is any purpose in the universe, I will never fulfill it. That's really a conclusion I came to is that I love skepticism in that it's an extremely useful tool to come
Mhm.
to correct conclusions. I understand skepticism isn't used for that today in a lot of areas. But like, even just in science, you use skepticism. History, you use skepticism. Um, in the law, you use skepticism to come to the correct conclusion, right? You're skeptical to everything else that's false to come to what is true. And I just learned that skepticism is great, but once I make it all about myself, I will go into really dark depression. And so that selfishness only breeds that. I was still, it doesn't mean I didn't give up skepticism or that I don't still question everything I believe constantly, which I do. But it's just that I still hold to Christianity as true in my mind. I realize you might disagree. But I don't, and this is something I also learned. The fact that I live it out is evidence to me that I really do truly believe this and that it is true. And that my heart is not for skepticism, even though my brain is. My heart is for glorifying God in everything I do, including skepticism. I want to use skepticism for God, which is like a weird way of like, what? But even like when I play video games, I want to use that for God's glory. I want to take
Mhm.
this time of rest so that I'm recouped for the time when I need to work. So I just do mindless things, maybe doom scrolling, right? And so I just
I, sh-
it's
I know we're getting kind of short here because my AirPods are going to die pretty soon. So it's just that what you're saying is so consistent with with my conclusion that I wanted to get to.
mm,
I hope that we can have um, another discussion about this because I
yeah,
really want to tell you what the punchline is because I do feel like it might apply to you in a different way
sure,
than you might expect. But
yeah,
one last thing I wanted to say. I know
sure,
that we've gone on for so long that I fear that most people won't get this far in the video.
yeah,
And I wanted to clarify something because I'm often misrepresented and misinterpreted. People will look for plot holes in my story that they can pick apart and they can put their finger on and say, "Oh, this is your problem," and
Right.
they can blame everything on that instead of it being on like actual evidence. I've talked a lot in this episode about Christians and not being consistent with the gospel
Yeah.
and how they're no different than anybody else as one of my doubts. But I want to clarify this with the strongest way possible, that that was not what led me out of Christianity.
Yes.
I did not stop believing. For everybody watching, I did not stop believing because Christians are hypocrites. Okay, that
Right.
was not it. That was simply an observation that I had early on.
Right.
I
And
want to like be super clear here that the reason I'm not a Christian anymore is because of hell, the absurdity of hell, the um, disproportionate distribution of salvation in the world that is not consistent with what it should look like, and the reliability of the Gospels. Like that one was the last straw. So I just want that really clear, that it has nothing to do with how Christians act or how they conduct themselves or how they don't reflect their actual beliefs. So just so everybody's clear before we lose connection.
yes. And I can't thank you enough for not only sharing your story, but also hearing me out. Um, and
Anytime.
yeah, and I don't know if there is anything I left out. I know there may be some minor details, but yeah, last year was like a
Well,
really hard
if you
year.
think if you think of any more, we can totally bring it up next time.
Yeah, of course. And thank you everyone for watching. If you actually did make it to the end, you might just skip to the end, but it was an amazing conversation. You really should watch through all of it. Maybe not as amazing as, oh, I could say that, but we're gonna keep talking if I say that. But yeah, I do hope for next time. And
And
um,
I did enjoy the podcast that you had with your brother.
oh, thank you.
I think your production quality is excellent.
Oh,
Like you
I
have you
appreciate
have a top level production, regardless of the content.
that.
The
Right.
production quality is A plus.
Thank you. So, and it's funny because when we made it, I was like, I know exactly what we did. To me, it's like this is like low, but everyone was saying, "Wow, this looks so good." I'm like, we use like very cheap lights and only three. Normally,
Well,
on like
you're
a good set like that, it's like you want, you got your scrim, you have your main face light, your or you got your scrim, and then you have your skylight, your overhead, and then your background and on
mm,
each person. So
well, it didn't have much effect as far as it being low quality, but your maybe it was your editing. Whatever you did it was pretty good, man. You should
oh,
definitely have more of those, and got a
good.
future in that.
Hey, I really appreciate that because I don't get that from a lot of. I mean, I do get that, but of course, us having that face to face means a lot. I do want to do more. The plan is to do more. I've just been immense, and I think you understand this, immensely busy. I'm trying to start a business, a camera rental business.
Oh
So,
wow.
yes, on top of doing everything else that I normally do, and I want to do these
Mhm.
podcasts now. And I also started full time in December at my job because I want to fund this company. I also had two wedding jobs in one on January 4th and one on December 21st. Can you believe
Cool.
that, in winter? So
Yeah.
I mean, I have been swamped, and then I'm building a server so that I actually have an
Wow.
editor, a kid from our church, a teenager who's going to be editing videos. So to anyone watching this right now, hey, hopefully we're going to have content consistently this year. We're going to have short form
Mhm.
content, long form content, podcasts. All of the interviews, I want them to be more professional, less of the no cuts and more of the just edited properly and still long and like great conversations because that's really what I want. But I also have
Mhm.
another camera that is just overpowered. So I'm so ready for this year. But you know, hey, thank you again. I hope your wife is doing well, and
Yeah, we're doing all right.
Good. Glad to hear it. And I hope next time will be as good, if not better. So, yeah, God bless you. And thanks everyone for tuning in. So,
Thanks for your time, man. I appreciate it. Anytime.